Give me the code or I break the lock. I know you're ignoring me. My sister's text hit my screen, followed instantly by a photo of her holding a commercial drill against the steel door of my Chicago penthouse. She wasn't asking. She was invading. I didn't panic. I didn't call the police. I opened my admin panel, generated a new code, 9942, and tagged the user profile as service vendor, waste disposal. Then I typed a reply. Fine, you win. Use code 9942. Make yourself at home. The trap was set. Before I tell you what happens when a federal agent comes home to find a waste disposal vendor throwing a party in his living room, tell me in the comments. If your family broke into your home while you were away, would you call the police immediately, or would you let them dig their own grave first? I want to know where you draw the line. I opened the building management app on my laptop, the screen glowing blue in the dim hotel room. I watched the status light on the digital lock turn from red to green as she punched in the numbers. As soon as the sensor registered entry, a pop-up appeared on the feed. Independent contractor liability waiver and commercial terms of service. It was a standard legal wall. 3 pages of text detailing that the entrant had no residency rights, was present solely for waste removal, and was liable for any damages. Jessica didn't even pause. She didn't read a single word. She just tapped AGRE with the impatience of someone who thought the world existed to serve her. On the screen, the heavy door swung open, and my sister walked into my sanctuary like she had built it herself. She dropped her designer bags on my Persian rug and immediately started gesturing to the 2 friends she had brought with her. They weren't just moving in. They were setting up. A banner was unfurled across my floor-to-ceiling windows. Future Mrs. Miller. She was hosting her engagement party in my home. I watched, a cold knot forming in my stomach, as she marched toward my home office. That room was my life. It held the servers for my private consulting firm, the encrypted files of billionaires who trusted me to manage their reputational crises, and the architectural models I built to decompress. Jessica didn't see a workspace. She saw wasted square footage. Get this junk out of here, I heard her say through the audio feed. We need space for the DJ. She grabbed a stack of client files, sensitive, irreplaceable documents, and tossed them into the hallway like garbage. Then she reached for the glass model of a sustainable city I'd spent 6 months constructing. She didn't carefully move it. She shoved it. It crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. She didn't flinch. She just laughed, pulling out her phone to live stream the destruction, finally clearing out Eudora's boring life. She told her followers, panning the camera over the wreckage of my hard work. This place needs some actual style. My name is Eudora. I am 29 years old, and I get paid a ridiculous amount of money to predict worst-case scenarios for Fortune 500 companies. My job is to look at a stable situation, identify the one loose screw that could bring the whole thing down, and eliminate it. For 20 years, that loose screw had been my sister. Watching her destroy my office, I knew exactly how she justified this. To anyone else, this looked like felony burglary. But to Jessica, this was just accounting. Narcissists keep a twisted internal ledger that only they can see. In her mind, I owed her this apartment. Why? Because 5 years ago, I missed her college graduation to save my first company from bankruptcy. In her world, that one absence created a debt so large that she was entitled to take everything I owned until the balance was paid. She wasn't stealing my home. She was collecting what she believed she had purchased with her feelings. She thought she was balancing the books. She didn't realize she was writing a check her future couldn't cash. I took a sip of water, my pulse steady, and watched her kick a shard of glass under the sofa. The liability had finally matured. I watched on the monitor as Jessica grew bored with the destruction of my office. She wanted a trophy. Something to toast her victory with. She made a beeline for the wine vault, built into the far wall of the living room. It was a climate-controlled fortress of glass and steel, biometrically locked and reinforced to withstand a sledgehammer. Inside sat a collection I had spent 5 years curating, rare vintages gifted by grateful CEOs whose reputations I had salvaged from the brink of ruin. Jessica tugged on the handle. Locked. She frowned, then pulled a metal nail file from her purse and started jamming it into the keypad, scratching the brushed steel finish. I sat in the dark of my hotel room, my finger hovering over my phone. A normal sister would have shouted through the speakers, telling her to stop. A normal person would have called the police right then to prevent the theft. But I wasn't trying to prevent a crime. I was curating one. In the eyes of the law, breaking a few models and tossing some papers might be dismissed as a civil dispute or minor vandalism. It was messy, but survivable. I didn't want survivable. I needed a felony. In Illinois, the threshold for Class 3 felony theft is $500. The bottle of 1996 Dom Perignon she was currently eyeing was worth 10 times that. I tapped the remote access command on my screen, 3,000 miles away, the magnetic seal on the vault hissed and disengaged. Jessica yanked the handle again, and this time, the heavy door swung open. She didn't pause to question her luck. She didn't wonder why a biometric lock had suddenly yielded to a nail file. She just cheered, grabbing the champagne and 2 bottles of a Napa Reserve that were irreplaceable. She popped the cork on the dom immediately, the foam spilling onto my hardwood floors, and took a long swig straight from the bottle. I checked the time. 2:19 in the morning. She had just crossed the line from annoying intruder to felon. She wasn't just drinking wine. She was drinking herself into a mandatory prison sentence. Then, a new notification flashed across the top of my screen. Bright red and urgent. Tenant proximity alert. User Derek is within geofence radius. Estimated arrival. 18 minutes. My breath hitched. Derek wasn't just a tenant. He was a lead enforcement officer for the DEA, a man who spent his days kicking down doors and his nights sleeping with a Sig Sauer on his nightstand. I had leased him the apartment specifically because he needed a secure, off-grid location while he testified in a high-profile cartel case. He regarded intruders with the same warmth he reserved for domestic terrorists. He was coming home early. I stared at the 2 windows on my laptop. On the left, my sister was dancing on my coffee table, wasting thousands of dollars of vintage wine. On the right, a GPS dot representing a lethal federal agent was moving rapidly down the I-90 corridor. I could pick up the phone. I could call Derek, warn him that there were civilians in the unit, tell him to wait for backup. It would be the safe, responsible thing to do. It would de-escalate the situation. I closed the GPS window. I didn't want de-escalation. I wanted a collision. I wanted Jessica to feel the full, unmitigated weight of the reality she had been protected from her entire life. I wanted her to meet a force that didn't care about her tears or her tantrums. I took a sip of my water, my pulse steady, and settled back into my pillows. The trap was baited. The predator was approaching, and the prey was too drunk on her own entitlement to hear the footsteps coming down the hall. I watched the GPS dot merge with the building's location. 18 minutes became 0. On the live feed, the elevator doors slid open. Derek stepped out. He didn't look like a man coming home to relax after a business trip. He moved with a coiled, predatory grace, his eyes scanning the corridor before his hand even touched the biometric scanner. He noticed the door immediately slightly ajar, where one of Jessica's friends had propped it open with a priceless sculpture to let in fresh air for their smoke break. He drew his weapon. It wasn't a dramatic motion, just a fluid transition from relaxed to lethal. He didn't call out. He didn't ask who was there. He entered the apartment silently, clearing the corners with the precision of a man who kicked down doors for a living. Inside, the music was thumping, a bass-heavy track that rattled the windows. Jessica was swaying in the center of the room, holding the bottle of Dom like a microphone. She never heard him coming. One moment, she was laughing at a joke one of her friends shouted. The next, the music cut out as Derek yanked the power cord from the wall. The sudden silence was violent. Federal agent, hands where I can see them. His voice was a bark of command that distorted the audio on my laptop speakers. The 2 friends dropped their drinks and bolted for the door, scrambling past him like terrified rats. Derek let them go. He was focused on the primary target. Jessica blinked, swaying unsteadily. The alcohol and her terminal entitlement made her slow to process reality. She didn't see a federal officer. She saw an inconvenience. Get out of my house, she slurred, stepping toward him, waving the heavy glass bottle. You're ruining the vibe. It was the wrong move. Derek didn't argue. He stepped inside her swing, disarmed her with a wrist lock that made me wince just watching it, and slammed her chest first onto the dining table. The champagne bottle shattered on the floor. Jessica screamed a high, piercing sound of absolute shock. Get off me. I live here. My sister owns this building. You are an intruder in a secured federal residence, Derek growled, cuffing her hands behind her back. State your name. Jessica. Jessica Miller. Let me up, you psycho. I took a sip of my tea, my heart rate barely elevating. This was the reality check she had needed for a decade. Gravity had finally arrived, but the moment of satisfaction was cut short. The elevator chimed again. My parents, Susan and Richard, burst into the hallway. They must have been waiting in the lobby, timing their entry to help Jessica clean up before the official guests arrived tomorrow. They saw the open door. They heard the screaming. They rushed in. When they saw their golden child pinned to the table by a man with a gun, they didn't pause to assess the situation. They didn't ask why Jessica was handcuffed. They attacked. Get your hands off her! My father bellowed, rushing forward with his chest puffed out, trying to physically intimidate a man who hunted cartel leaders. Derek spun, keeping his weapon low but ready, warning them back with a single hand gesture. Back away. Federal Marshal. My mother, Susan, took one look at the scene and did what she did best. She weaponized her tears. She whipped out her phone, tapping the screen with frantic precision. She didn't call 911 to help the situation. She opened Facebook Live. "Help! My daughter is being attacked!" She shrieked at the camera, panning from her crying daughter to Derek's stony face. "This man broke in! He has a gun! He's hurting my baby!" She wasn't just defending Jessica. She was framing him. She looked directly at the security camera mounted in the corner she knew I was watching and screamed the words that turned my blood to ice. "You did this, Eudora. You sick, twisted girl. You lured her here. You knew a violent man was here and you sent your sister into a trap. You tried to get her killed." Derek stiffened. He looked from the sobbing mother to the screaming woman on the table, and then up at the camera lens. He lowered his weapon, but his eyes were cold. He realized he wasn't just dealing with intruders. He was in the middle of a setup, and to him, I was the architect. The Chicago PD arrived within 4 minutes, swarming the hallway with the heavy-footed urgency reserved for officer in distress calls. The apartment filled with uniforms, effectively separating the combatants. Derek was pulled aside by a sergeant who looked like he'd seen too many political messes and had no patience for this one. My parents huddled in the corner, with Susan playing the traumatized mother to a sympathetic rookie officer. Jessica, sensing the shift in power, stopped crying instantly. She sat up on the table, smoothed her skirt, and reached into her oversized designer bag. "He attacked me for no reason," she told the officer, her voice trembling just enough to be believable. "I have a right to be here. I am a tenant." The sergeant looked at Derek. "Major, if she claims residency, you can't just throw her on the table. You know the drill." Derek bristled. "She's not a resident. I leased this unit 2 weeks ago. I've got the contract." "So do I," Jessica replied. She handed over a Chicago Standard lease, showing a rent of $2,000. Move-in dated yesterday. Signed by Eudora Sterling. My sister rented it to me. I paid 6 months up front. Under Chicago law, you cannot evict me without notice." The sergeant skimmed the paper and exhaled. "Chicago tenant protections are strict. If she has a signed lease, this is a civil matter. We can't arrest a tenant." My parents smirked, certain they had gamed the system. If the police walked away, Jessica would stay, and I would be stuck with her. Then my voice came through the speakers. "Before you leave, check the entry log." The sergeant reviewed the smart panel. Code 9942. At 2:14 p.m. "Ask Miss Miller what message she saw when she entered it," I said. Jessica blurted. "Nothing, just a beep." "Wrong," I answered. I pulled up a digital contract from London. "That code is not a tenant code, it's a commercial vendor code. It requires accepting a liability waiver." She signed in as a cleaning contractor. Limited to 24 hours. No tenant rights. Removing property is theft. Refusing to leave is trespass. Paper lost to forensic logs. "So she's a vendor, refusing to leave," Derek concluded. "And everything in those bags is inventory she's stealing." Police ordered her away from the furniture. Jessica panicked. My parents froze. Then Susan snapped. Realizing manipulation had failed, she grabbed a bronze sculpture and smashed my Penthouse server $50,000 in hardware, thinking she had erased evidence. The cameras switched to backups. Derek barely blinked. "That's destruction of evidence in a federal case. Class 1 felony. Cuff her." Jessica and Susan were dragged out, screaming. Richard remained until Derek pointed to his G-Wagon. "That your car?" It transported a felon and burglary tools. Under civil asset forfeiture, it's now government property. "Keys." Stunned, Richard surrendered them. He watched his family hauled away while his car was seized, left standing alone at the curb. I ended the feed from London, deleted my family's contact folder, and walked away. Like a bad investment, I wrote them off. Weeks later, I spotted the same G-Wagon on a federal auction site. I didn't bid. I had already collected everything that mattered.